Hello there, and thanks so much for joining me for another video. I'm Erin Eno, and today we're going to be painting this calm, serene beachscape. If you do like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and also to see more tutorials like this one, please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now this is a super simple landscape, you guys. Anyone can do this. We're keeping the colors to a minimum, and we're just keeping the values to a minimum just to keep it kind of calm and serene. So grab your paints and let's get started. Today I'm using my Baohong Academy cold press watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, 100% cotton. This sheet size is roughly 5 by 7, give or take, 5.5, 7 1/4, something like that. For brushes, I have my Princeton Neptune in a size 8 round. I have my Silver Black Velvet in a size 8 round, and I have a Princeton Snap in a size 0. Now, I'm just using this Neptune because it holds a lot of water. That's what I'm going to use to do my wash with. This I'm going to use for the finer details. I may be able to just use this because it has such a nice point on it, but what you will need is just, you know, a standard size 8 round and a tiny brush for the little details. Okay, so you don't necessarily need a pencil for this one, but I'm just going to draw a line about 2/3 down from my page, and we're not doing a water line on this painting. We're just going to do sand, which can be irregular. Okay, so it's not like you need a perfectly level horizon line. I'm just leaving that there just so I know where to so I know where to put my water when I wet the background, so I don't bleed the two colors together. So I'm going to take my Neptune, and you can use a wash brush for this. This one's a little dirty. I'm just using this, like I said, because it holds a lot of water, and I don't want to go in with a huge brush. I probably could have gotten away with a slightly larger brush, but it's all good. Just going to go right along that pencil line. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's not a water line. Okay, it's like a sand dune kind of line. Then I'm going to tilt my board just so I can get this water to kind of run down a bit so I know I have it all good and wet. It's just going to have a bit of a sheen. It's not going to be like drenched wet, okay? And I've got this taped to a board so it won't warp, so you'll have to do that as well. And I don't know if I'm going to go right to the border or not. Yeah, I think I will. Why not? Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to put this brush aside because I really want water control. I don't want to drench this painting, okay? And we're going to do the sky, and it's going to be very light. I have some blues already in my palette, and I want them really soft. So this is kind of a really light bluish green, I guess, is what it is. And I'm just going to lightly stroke some blue into this painting. I don't want to overdo it with the sky, and I don't want it dark. Like, I don't want it really gray. I want it kind of light and cheery. So I don't want a real dull, stormy sky. So I'm going to add in some cerulean blue, which is really bright. I don't know if this is on screen or not, so there's my cerulean blue. But I don't want it very heavily pigmented, so I'm going to take some off in my water jar. And I'm just going to go in now with a bit of this cerulean blue, and I'm going to put a little more at the land line than the top. Okay, so I want it a little deeper down towards where the sand, where it meets the sand. And I'm just going to plunk a little more in the background. Again, diluted. I don't want this to get heavy. The idea is to keep this really light, and it's going to dry a little lighter, but still kind of err on the side of caution, and don't get carried away with your blue. Okay, And as that dries, we'll see it getting lighter and we can go in and tap in a little more down there. I think what I will do is add a little of my turquoise in with that cerulean blue, just so it's not horrendously bright. And again, this is the turquoise. It's a very light turquoise. Okay, so just like that, I'm going to tap off the excess water on my paper towel, and I'm just going to go in, put a little bit more at this horizon line. Now this brush holds a lot of water, so be careful that you don't drown it and start getting these funny blooms. And I'm just using the tip of my brush just to lightly tap in some blue. And I'm trying to use restraint here because I don't want to get carried away. So I'm going to dry off my brush. Okay, and I'm going to make a heavier pigmented version of that kind of turquoise and cerulean blue. And I think to deepen it up, I will even add in some ultramarine deep. Just to deepen it up a little bit more. Actually, you know what? I'm not digging that color. I'm going to go Prussian blue instead. That's better. So there I've got my Prussian blue, and I'm going to tap the excess off my brush and just put the tip of my brush in that Prussian blue. And I'm going to turn this upside down so I have a little more control. And I'm just going to put some heavier pigment right along that line. Now I'm trying to keep it fairly straight, but not perfect, as I say, because it's not a horizon water line. So you can get away with it being a little wonky. And that will bleed out as well. And I think I will stop there because I don't want it to getting too dark. That might even be a little dark. Maybe I'll just try to pick up a little bit of that. And then I'm going to go in and put the sand in. Now, if we decide we're not happy with that line, we can always go back once the sand's dry and even that out a little more with a slightly deeper blue. So I'm going to just quickly dry this with my heat tool on low. I don't want to create blooms, but I just want to dry it so we can get on and do the sand. Okay, so this is just very slightly damp now, but it's dry enough that we can do the sand. And I'm just going to continue to use my silver black velvet for this. Okay, and I'm going to wet the whole area again. I don't have to come right up to that water line, but I will come close to it because the paint that we put down there is going to be wet, and then it will start to migrate down into that wet paper that we're doing now. And I do have some brown already in my palette. I think it's just a mixture of, oh dear, sepia and maybe a bit of raw umber. Actually, you know what? I think this is just plain sepia, just really watered down. But I'm going to kind of redden it up a bit with some burnt sienna, just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to go in now and just do a light wash of this all over where we've wet it. And remember, it was dry at the horizon line, so I'm going to go along that horizon line carefully, like so. You're going to get some overlap, and that's okay. That's just going to look like, you know, some depth in the distance. Don't sweat it too much if you get some overlap. I'm not going to sweat it. This is a simple relaxing landscape. So I'm just going to wet this to blend it in. And then while our paper's still damp, we're going to add a little bit of texture to this. And I'm just going to go and take some sepia. That was way too much sepia. And a little bit of that burnt sienna. And I don't want my brush drenched. And I'm just going to start tapping in some of this burnt sienna. You can do it in lines, you can just tap little areas, and that's going to bleed out as well and just give us some texture to our sand. Okay, so my brush isn't completely drenched. Look, we add a little bit of richness to that horizon line, just to heavy that up just a little bit. And if you're using your size 8 brush and you find you're not getting that control, switch to a smaller brush. It just doesn't hold as much water, so you may have to go in and load your brush up a little more often. Okay, but the problem with using a larger brush can be that you go in with too much water and you get a little dangerously close to creating a lot of blooms. So I'm just softening this out. And again, this is going to dry lighter. But I'm just adding this in just to get some depth, so the sand's not like perfectly flat, because it would not be perfectly flat in real life. Not this is realism by any means, but you get the idea. And then I think while that is still wet, actually, you know what, I'm just going to add a little bit more because this is going to bleed out. Now I want to do a little tuft of grass, grassy kind of beach grass here. So I am going to add a little bit of sepia to that, and that will bleed out. It's a little more heavy. It's a little more heavily. It's got more pigment, less water, so it's not going to like really bleed out. It'll just soften. And if you find that it's not softening enough to your liking, just dry your brush off, clean it off, then dry it off, and then just kind of soften out any edges that are kind of a little too harsh. Okay, and we can always go back and add to that. So now what I think I will do while this is still a little damp, I'm going to go into that sky, and I'm going to go back to my kind of deeper, more muddied blue mixture. I'm going to tap off the excess water just on the tip of my brush, and I'm going to turn this upside down. Now the sand is still wet, so I'm going to be careful here, but I just want to add a little more depth right at the horizon line for this blue. It's just going to kind of push things back a bit and make it look like this is really in the distance. It's also toning down that cerulean a bit, so it's not such a bright blue. So I'm just carefully following that line. And because the sand is wet, it's going to have a little bit of a soft edge in some spots. And that's kind of what I want. I don't want anything too harsh. So I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush. Now this brush holds a lot of water, so I'm really going to kind of tap that water off. And I'm just going to come in and just almost dry, well, not almost, I'm dry brushing this out. Okay. So there's no water on my brush. I'm just kind of feathering it out with the bristles on my brush. That way you kind of prevent any unwanted blooms. Okay, just like so. So I kind of like that. I think to go along with that, I will heavy up the sand line a bit as well. I don't want to get too carried away here though. And I've got hardly any water on my brush, okay, because I don't want it to bleed into what we just did. Again, if it bleeds, it will just kind of soften a bit. And I think I will leave it at this, because when we're done, if we feel that it needs to be a little darker, that can always be added to. Okay, so my brush is still just damp here. And now that this is done, I'm going to dry this with my heat tool. And then we will put in the last little details. Okay, so this is a little cool to the touch, so it's just a little damp, but we're going in with more pigment than water, so it should not bleed. And I'm going to go in, get a little bit of raw umber, because I want to have it highly pigmented, but I don't want it really dark, so I don't want to use like sepia, okay? And I will even add in a little bit of Azo Yellow Medium. I'm going to tap the excess water off my brush, and I'm just going to put that paint just on the very tip of my brush, and we're going to start putting in some long stems of grass. Now I'm going to continue with this brush, but if you're finding it's hard to control, this is where you need to switch to your smaller brush. And I'm just going to do these thin strokes of grass that are going up, and some will curve off to this left side, but primarily I want them all kind of curving off to the right like that. And make sure your brush isn't very wet, because you don't want your blades of grass just bleeding into each other. We really want them defined. And we're going to go in after and add different values of this brown. Okay, so it gives that illusion of light on the grass. Okay, just going up into that sky and curving over. We'll do some little guys. Now you can establish all your blades of grass with this lighter color and then go in and heavy things up. And you don't need a ton of it. And the reason why I wanted to do this nice and light is because I didn't want to have to, I wanted to be able to go over the brown or over the sand and everything with a lighter brown. I didn't want this to be like a stark black silhouette, okay? I do want these browns to come through. And you don't need a lot, like I say. So we're going to stop there. I'm going to take the tip of my brush and just put some little dots at the end of some of these grasses. Make this one hang down a little more. We'll do some little dots on these guys. What I don't like, not didn't, is that we don't have any smaller ones in here. Shorter ones, I mean. So I'm just going to do a short one with some dots like that. Now we're just going to go in and put some kind of wispy broken ones in. Okay, so that's that. Now we're going to go in with a little deeper pigment. So I'll take that stronger mix of sepia, and I'm going to turn my board a bit. I just don't want my hand mucking up my painting. And we're just going to add in some darker strands now. Not strands, blades. Just gonna have some broken ones, like broken lines. So you can use this to add in more blades of grass, or you can do it just to heavy up some areas of the lighter grasses that you have. Just kind of do it sparingly. I'm just going to go back to that lighter color and just put a few little wisps up here. Okay. Put some dots on this guy here. So now I'm going in with even darker sepia, and I'm not going to go all the way up this time. I'm just going to add some density towards the bottom. Okay, a little more sepia. And you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of water on your brush. Otherwise, what you do down here is just going to all blur into one another, and it's just going to make a muddy mess. We want to make sure that that sepia kind of stands out on its own. Okay, you could even go in, do a few little baby tufts of grass over here. But I want to keep it simple. I don't want to get too carried away. That's a little heavy. I'm just going to blot some of that up, soften it up a bit. Now I'm going to go in, and I think I will take some black. And I want to be very reserved with the black, that's for sure. Okay, so I am, just to be safe, going to go to my size 0. Take all the excess water off my brush. Go into that black. Okay, add it to the sepia. And just do a few little tiny darker blades at the bottom. I'm not actually adding in more blades, I'm just kind of adding a bit of shadow to the blades of grass that are already in there. So that's that. I'm going to leave that alone. Maybe do a little more value on just some of these, just with a very light touch. Okay, and I'm going to leave it at that. So now I'm going to go into my size 8 again. Again, if your brush is not as pointed on the tip as this one, stick to your smaller brush. But I'm going to go in and get some of that sepia, heavier mixture now, and just tap a little more depth in the sand towards the bottom, where this sand would be coming out of the little grass mound, if that makes sense. I'm not verbalizing that very well, but I hope you get the idea. You could even do shadows from this, but I don't want to complicate this. I want to keep it really simple. Okay, so I'm just going in with a damp brush now, kind of feathering this out a bit. Add a little more darkness right at the base, just to give it some depth. And then I think what I will do is go in and get a little bit of sepia, a little bit of that burnt sienna, make this light sandy mixture. It's actually not light, but it's watered down, okay, so it's going to be light when it hits the page. And we're going to cover our sky. And I'm just going to do some little flicks just to add some texture to the sand. Now that may be a little heavy, so I'm going to blot some up. But I just didn't want, and I'm just lightly blotting it up, okay? I don't want them to disappear altogether. I might have blotted up a little too much. There we go. Now that's fairly watered down, so it should dry a little lighter. So I'll leave it for now. And I'm going to go to my size 0. And remember, I don't want heavy silhouettes on this, but I do want to put a few little birds in the sky. First of all, now that that's had a little bit of time to sit, I am just going to tap it up ever so slightly. Okay, so they're still there, but not so dramatic. Now for the birds, I'm going to use that burnt sienna and black mixture, because again, I don't want silhouettes on here. I don't want like black silhouettes. Okay, and I'm just going to do a few little birds angled this way. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to keep it simple, but I also want your eye drawn to some movement. So it's going to go from here to the birds. It's just a little something to fill in this space. And I'm just going to do the, you know, the typical seagull curve like that. Nothing fancy. Little small guys up here. Okay. The closer they are, the bigger they would be. And I usually like to do things in odd numbers, but you know what? That's an odd number. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to push my luck. So now that I see that this is dry, I do want to add a little more definition to these, a little more contrast. So I'm going to stick with my size 0, and I don't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to do a few little strands. I don't want to add strands, but I'm just going to darken up some at the bottom. Just with a very light touch, because if I throw this down and it's too dark, there's no going back. And just heavy up some of these guys just a little bit. And maybe heavy up some of these little dots. Nothing drastic, right? This is all about just serene and very simple. And I've overdone that. So I'm going to see if I can just pick some of this up, because I don't like that. Try this again. Hopefully it won't bleed too much. Okay, well, I've officially ruined that guy, but that's okay. Add a little more depth towards the bottom here. And I think I'm going to call that done, and we'll take the tape off and see how she looks. And there you go. There is our simple, serene beach landscape. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. And I really hope you'll give it a try. If you do and you're on Instagram, please be sure to share your work and tag me. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.